Used discoloration on exertion since 1 year. The child was detected to have cyanosis at the age of 1 week, but was never taken to the hospital. At the age of 1 year, the child was taken to hospital for some complaint where she was told that she has a hole in the heart and was advised on a reassurance. At 3 years, the SOB increased and there was an increase in the cyanosis, for which she had to undergo an operation. There is no history of any cyanotic cells. There is history of squatting episodes, no history of failure to thrive, no history of recurrent LRTI or CHF episodes. She is a product of non-consanguineous marriage and a full-term normal vaginal delivery. There is no family history of heart disease. So positive points from the history: neonatal cyanosis was detected at 1 week of age, which progressively increased. At 3 years, the child had undergone some surgery. There is history of squatting episodes. There is no history suggesting failure. So what does this history point us to? Yes, Anita ma'am.
Okay, so since the cyanosis must not have been very significant, because the child obviously continued till about 3 years of age, so we have to think of a cyanotic heart disease. Since there is no history suggestive of failure, we have to think more like in terms of reduced pulmonary blood flow, that is tetralogy of Fallot, or some sort of a tetralogy physiology. Now, it could be tetralogy because that is the commonest, but it could also be any other condition like double outlet right ventricle, like tricuspid atresia, like atrioventricular sacral defect with pulmonary stenosis, or even TGA, VSD, PS. But from the history, it seems that at 1 year at least, the child probably wasn't very sick because it was just told that, reassurance to the child. So cyanosis must have been mild, because if somebody picks up cyanosis, then nobody will sort of reassure and say that, okay, your child's hole is simple hole and it might heal with time. So perhaps the cyanosis was quite mild to begin with, and that's not unusual story for tetralogy of Fallot's patients, where the infundibular pulmonary stenosis may just keep on increasing over a period of time if the child becomes more and more blue. So again, that really does not exclude tetralogy, but at the same time, I would not think in terms of transposition of great arteries, because in transposition the cyanosis tends to be much more severe and therefore should have been picked up. So I'll say tetralogy or a tetralogy physiology where the great arteries are not transposed.
A few more things. What I wanted to say is, as Madam already mentioned about DTGA, the transposition physiology, usually the survival beyond 1 year without any treatment is a 90% succumbs to the disease. Only the 10% survival is there, and this child without not much of the events which is persisted for the 3 years is less likely to be the transposition physiology. That is the one point. And second one is about the squatting episodes. Even though it is a classical of the tetralogy of the Fallot, but it is known to occur than many other conditions, which are the madam already listed, including the tricuspid atresia, the DORB conditions, and also. But the one important thing is the child is not having the cyanotic spells, and the squatting episodes of presence is slightly doesn't correlate the both together. But it happens. The cyanotic spells usually the occurs in this younger age group, whereas by the time the squatting episode starts, most of the cyanotic spells comes down. So if the severity of the RBOT obstruction may not be such a severe grade, and it is not a precipitating factors are not there, probably then the child can have the more of the squatting episodes than in the previous history of the cyanotic spells. And one more thing is the child is operated at the age of the 3 years. And if you give them much more information after the operation, what is the relief of the symptoms, like the cyanosis is relieved or the SOB is relieved, probably that give a clue to us whether it is a definitive surgery or a palliative surgery. But the major thing is, because the child is symptomatic even after the surgery, most likely that is a palliative than there's a definitive surgery is done. But 16 years means nearly the 13 years after the surgery, it could be even a complication, even a corrective surgery also. Like a residual lesions are left over in the corrective surgeries. So that can be the progressive now. And especially if it is a top, the development of an AR. But most of the time, the AR manifestations doesn't occur in the early second decade. It usually occurs a little bit later. So I think these things can be considered, madam.
Yeah, the only thing is because she has not only shortness of breath now, but she also has bluish discoloration now. So probably she's had a palliation, because in corrective surgeries, usually cyanosis should not come back, even if they have residual VSD, unless there's residual VSD and PS both. But it's likely that she's had a BT shunt at 3 years of age or any other surgery, which is palliative, because she still shows a little bit of cyanosis, which is increasing for the last 1 year. So I think we should go more towards palliative surgery rather than corrective surgery at 3 years.
And do you think the natural history is suggestive of a palliative surgeries to persist for the 13 years and following that? But most of the time, percent of the known to the have been a closure of the BT shunts. So the natural history is a slightly
Sure.
better in this patient than the expected one.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And that is why also another point against a BT shunt is that she underwent surgery at 3 years of age. If she had something which was correctable, then nobody would do a BT shunt at 3 years of age unless, the anatomy is not suitable. So if it was a 3-month or a 4-month-old child, BT shunt would have been a high possibility. But at 3 years of age, it is less of a possibility. And therefore, one has to think of other palliative procedures also, which are done for cyanotic heart diseases. Classical example being Glenn or Fontan. Fontan is usually done little later. 3 years is a bit early for Fontan. So I would say that it could be a Glenn surgery, or it could be any other palliative surgery where the cyanosis has not completely gone, but she has remained asymptomatic, or let us say practically asymptomatic, for at least 12 years or so, and she is symptomatic only for last 1 year.
Assuming that it could be a Glenn shunt, then the reappearance of the cyanosis, can we have the DD discussion on that?
Sure. So if there is Glenn shunt done, the saturations usually improve to about 80% or even more, and therefore cyanosis doesn't really bother the patient. But as these patients become bigger and bigger, we must realize that the contribution of IVC, inferior vena cava blood, to the mixed venous blood keeps on increasing over a period of time. So for a small child, superior vena cava contribution is a lot. And therefore, after a Glenn, that patient will improve a lot, because it is superior vena cava to pulmonary arteries. Inferior vena cava after a Glenn is still going onto the systemic side. It is still going into aorta. But as the child becomes into an adult, the inferior vena cava contribution keeps on increasing, and therefore the cyanosis keeps on increasing despite a very well-functioning Glenn operation. So to have development of cyanosis when they're getting into their older age, 12 years, 13 years, when they're getting taller, when IVC contribution becomes bigger, is a very, very usual story after a Glenn surgery. Although very many times you would tell the patients that after Glenn surgery, they will require another Fontan surgery and they should come back in a couple of years' time. But very many parents decide not to, because the child is doing so well with little amount of cyanosis or no cyanosis discernible to the parent, that they continue with medical therapy. It's only when the cyanosis starts to increase or the shortness of breath starts to increase that they seek medical opinion. And the reason being that IVC contribution is now getting bigger and bigger, and therefore their systemic desaturation keeps on getting worse.
One of the reasons, as Madam already said, is the IVC contribution. Could be any other reasons when it is still functioning Glenn?
Yes, the other condition where you get more of cyanosis is pulmonary AV fistulae. So many patients of Glenn operation, especially those where antegrade flow has been totally ligated, which is usually done, and they don't have any antegrade flow, therefore they have no pulsatile flow going to the pulmonary arteries, they tend to develop pulmonary AV malformations or pulmonary AV fistulae, and that also contributes to the cyanosis. The third reason of increasing cyanosis would be opening up of veno-venous collaterals. That means azygous vein and hemiazygous vein, which steals blood from the pulmonary arteries. So whatever blood from superior vena cava is coming to the pulmonary artery, it gets stolen into the veno-venous collaterals from azygous and even many other veno-venous collaterals, and that obviously reduces the pulmonary blood flow in these patients and further worsens their cyanosis. So these are some of the causes of increasing cyanosis following a Glenn procedure.
Yeah, usually the Glenn in the early stages can have the complications of the Glenn closure, like an SVC obstruction with a thrombus or anything. Is that known to the NACA with such a late complications because of the non-functioning Glenn also?
Very, very unusual, because Glenn is a very bright, very wide anastomosis, like a BT shunt, unlike a BT shunt. BT shunt is 4 millimeter, 5 millimeter. Glenn is like 1 centimeter. So it's a very big anastomosis. Usually there are no stenosis or relative stenosis as the child gets bigger. It is usually not an issue. And if it gets blocked, then the patients usually present with puffiness of the face of the body, rather than with increasing size. Because of the SVC obstruction, yes, because of the high pressure in the SVC. So therefore, having this sort of a history is very likely to be a normally functioning Glenn, but getting insufficient pulmonary blood flow because of growth of the patient.
Yeah.
So at the end of the
I couldn't hear you, Dr. Lalita.
Yeah, there is a discontinuation of the voice.
now you're able to hear?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now at the end of the history, with the history of squatting episodes and cyanosis which is progressing, and with the history of surgery, we can come to some diagnosis. That is, it's basically VSD-PS physiology which has undergone a palliative shunt. So our first possibility, one is TOF. Second is tricuspid atresia, VSD-PS. EOR with VSD-PS. And single ventricle with VSD-PS. Less likely to be transposition.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll go to the examination which can tell us which way we are leading into. Next slide, please. So on examination, the patient's cyanosis is present, grade 3 clubbing is present, there is a median sternotomy scan, and there is no dysmorphic features. Pulse rate is regular 100 per minute, normal volume and character, and all peripheral pulses are 12. Blood pressure of 100 by 70. JVP is elevated with the prominent A wave. Coming to the cardiovascular examination, a hyperdynamic LV apex felt in the left fifth intercostal space outside the mid-clavicular line. No left second intercostal space pulsations. No other palpable sounds or thrills, and no left parasternal pulsation. On auscultation, S1 is single, second heart sound is single, no S3, S4, and a grade 4 by 6 holosystolic medium pitched murmur best heard at the lower left sternal border, and no additional murmurs are there. Other systems are normal. So the positive features are a raised JVP, LV type of hyperdynamic apex. You don't have any thrills, single S1, S2, and a murmur, possibly a VSD murmur, which is a holosystolic murmur, best heard at the left sternal border.
Probably thrill is has to be there, 4 by 6, grade 6. No, so there should be a thrill.
So I think the first very important positive finding is a mid-sternotomy or a median sternotomy scar. So that is something which is obviously because of the previous surgery. So the question is, does it really help us to identify what surgery she has undergone? So although conventionally shunts are done from the sides or the lateral thoracotomy side, which is right or left, depending upon which sided shunt is being done. But some of the central shunts, so-called central shunts, are done from the midline. So it doesn't rule out having a shunt completely, because sometimes, especially both pulmonary arteries are small, you want to give them a midline or a central shunt, and that central shunt is usually done from the mid-sternotomy incision. So that's number one. But yes, the typical modified VT shunts are usually done from the sides. So though they have usually enterolateral scar. The second condition that we were contemplating is a Glenn operation, which is definitely a possibility, because median sternotomy scar is what you do when you do a Glenn. Often it is done on bypass, but sometimes you can do off pump also Glenn surgery. And even then it will be a median sternotomy scar. So I think it points more towards Glenn, but it doesn't rule out a VT shunt.
VT shunt, initially they used to do a median sternotomy, right? Now many are going for a peripheral approach.
Yes, I think as I said, most of the time the BT shunt is done from the side. Generally speaking, you use median sternotomy scar when we want to use a cardiopulmonary bypass. That's the usual way of looking at it. So if you're doing a BT shunt right or left, you're actually not going on bypass, and therefore there's no need to do median sternotomy incision in those cases. So they would rather do enterolateral thoracotomy, which is between the two ribs actually. They don't have to cut the bone at all. But the central shunt, which means the shunt given to the main pulmonary artery rather than a branch, right or left, that is done usually from the mid-sternotomy, because the main pulmonary artery is lying in the middle. And very often you need to put these patients on bypass when you're doing a central shunt, because you cannot really clamp any of the pulmonary arteries like you do for BT shunt. So most often shunts will be done from the sides and Glenn will be done from the midline. But I think students must remember that even central shunts are done from the midline only, and you'll have a similar scar.
Is that age usually gives a clue to us whether it is a central shunt or a Glenn shunt?
Yes, I think generally central shunt is done for cases who have very small pulmonary arteries to make both the pulmonary arteries grow. And that is usually a problem in infants and neonates when you cannot do a full surgery. For example, if you have a tetralogy of Fallot or a pulmonary atresia VSD, where pulmonary arteries are very, very small, giving them shunt on one side is not going to help much because the other pulmonary artery will not grow. And therefore, you tend to give them a central shunt. But yes, you're right. At 3 years, the role of central shunt would be, I wouldn't say not possible, but it's little less likely than a BT shunt. I think we should think more in terms of a Glenn operation than a BT shunt if there is a mid-sternotomy scar, considering the age, considering the fact that she has now again become symptomatic after so many years, like 10, 12 years. So I think we should think more in terms of Glenn. The second odd point on examination
there is a question from the Neelesh to tell about all the scars in the cardiology.
Okay.
Probably coarctation and everything they wanted to include it.
I think that will be a sort of a seminar in itself, but I think I can just tell you about the mid. Practically everything is done from the mid-sternotomy scar whenever a bypass is required, whether it's tetralogy of Fallot's or even a VSD or ASD closure. But you can have an anterolateral thoracotomy scar for a BT shunt, posterolateral thoracotomy scar for a coaptation of aorta, PA band. Sometimes people do from the sides, but most of the time PA band is done from midline. But yes, Glenn, Fontan, corrections, whenever one has to go on bypass, it should be a mid-sternotomy scar. Even constrictive pericarditis, which used to be pericardiectomy, which used to be done from the side scar earlier, is now being done from the midline, because most of the surgeons feel very comfortable having a CPB or a cardiopulmonary bypass standby in case there is a problem. So they are much more comfortable from the midline. I think the only reason one should avoid from midline is that it produces a lot of adhesions, and therefore if you have to go in again, like you have to do for a Glenn or after a shunt or after some palliative surgery, you may get into trouble because of the adhesions. But I think most of the time midline scar is what most surgeons are comfortable with, especially if there is a need for CPB or a potential need for CPB, one would go from the midline.
PDA closure?
From the side from the side. Because PDA is quite a posterior structure.
Yes. And some of the points to be added is the mini-thoracotomy scars. Like nowadays, valvular surgeries are done through the multi-port access surgeries. Right. And ASD also is a multi-port access, they tried it.
Yes. So very often in females, they do a right side anterolateral scar, which is just under the breast, so that the scar is not seen. So very often in females, they would do an ASD surgery from right side scar just under the breast, right side incision just under the breast. I think the other odd point over here is, I would say is elevated JVP. I think that's something which would suggest that the patient has gone into failure, or let us say, let me not use the word failure, but to say that his JVP is elevated or jugular venous pressure is elevated and there's a prominent A wave, which is not the usual case in tetralogy of Fallot's or cyanotic heart disease with reduced pulmonary blood flow after a BT shunt. So again, that could point more towards SVC2PA and anastomosis.
Yeah, in the presence of these shunts, can we make out this A wave and all?
In presence of, sorry?
In presence of these palliative shunts, can we clearly make out the wave patterns? And
Yeah, if they haven't left any antegrade flow, the surgeon has not left any antegrade flow across the pulmonary valve, that means there is a total ligation of pulmonary artery, then the JVP will be like a normal JVP. It will be like a normal JVP, like you will have A wave, V wave, X and Y descent. However, if there is an antegrade flow, which is left by many surgeons, they do that, then you may get a little bit of a pulsatile flow into the JVP, like systole and diastole. So then you have two waves, systolic and diastolic. But most of the time, you will see the typical venous pattern in the JVP like you see in normal people, but it may be high because of the pressure being higher compared to normal people.
Assume that the Glenn surgery is done, then there is a transaction of the communication to the SVC to the RA. Then how is the JVP is going to be?
Because basically the pulmonary artery becomes venous pressure. If you take PA pressure in these patients, you don't get systole diastole, because that is how the venous pressure is. That is not related to RA, it is related to the vein pulsation. That is how the vein, the blood flows into veins. And obviously it is all controlled by the pumping chamber, which is left ventricle in these cases, or a single ventricle in these cases. But the PA pressure will be very unusual. You won't get systolic, diastolic pressure. You will get A and C waves like you get in venous pressure. So there is an atrialization of the pulmonary artery pressure. It's not connected to RA. It's not telling us the RA pressure.
Yeah, it is the left ventricular function and the reflection into the left atrium will causes the reflection into the JVP in this directly. That is one thing. And the second one is, but intrathoracic pressure changes are still transmitted very well. So the changes related to the intrathoracic pressures will be reflected in the JVP once again. So even we can have the respiratory variations normally, even though there is a transaction of the SVC to the RA. And there is a question of the raised JVP in the TOF physiology. So the adult TOF is known to have a prominent A wave, even though it may not have an elevated JVP, but a prominent A wave is one of the feature of the adult TOF, which is this child is 16 years can be considered as little bit an adult TOF. And another cause is in the RV dysfunction occurs, then only the elevation then occurs, which is a little bit a late feature, but usually it doesn't occur at the end of the second decade. Usually it occurs the third or the fourth decade. And another features of the raised JVP in the TOF physiology is the complications of this TOF. Like not simply having the TOF, but has an associated other lesions can be the produce that. Can you say add any other features for a raised JVP in TOF, madam?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the other could be if there is a restriction of VST in a tetralogy of fallus patient, then you can get RA pressure little on the higher side, and therefore the JVP may be elevated. The failure you already
causes only prominent A wave or even JVP elevation also?
Even JVP elevation. And the other thing is if there is tricuspid regurgitation because of abnormal tricuspid valve in a tetralogy of fallus, which is again very unusual, then you will get prominent JVP as well as prominent V waves and Y descent, not A wave.
Clinically, presence of an LV apex in a cyanotic child and a prominent VSD murmur, I think it goes in favor of tricuspid atresia.
Or single ventricle.
Or single ventricle. We can safely exclude a tetralogy of fallus. DOR.
I think, yes, the DORB you should not exclude, because DORB sometimes with a restrictive VSD can give you LV apex. So there are just 3 or 4 conditions which are LV apex associated with cyanosis. The classical is tricuspid atresia, as you said. The second is double inlet left ventricle or single ventricle. The commonest type of single ventricle is DILV or double inlet left ventricle, where you have an LV apex. The third could be double outlet right ventricle with a restrictive VSD, where the LV is getting hypertrophic because the only outlet for VSD, which is for LV, which is VSD, is restrictive. And fourth is Ebstein's anomaly. Having said that, Ebstein's anomalies usually have a very quiet heart, very difficult to perceive a left ventricular apex in Ebstein's anomaly, but Ebstein also has an LV kind of apex.
If we consider it as tricuspid atresia, what else should we look out for?
So if you think about left of the tricuspid atresia, then LV will be apex will be LV type. Usually it should not be displaced. It should be at its usual position unless there is any reason for cardiomegaly. Like in this patient, it could be because of ventricular dysfunction a little bit because she's 16 years old, or it could be that she has developed some kind of mitral regurgitation, which may produce an down and out apex, that is LV apex, which is outside its normal boundary, and you will have no left parasternal pulsations, absolutely quiet left parasternal region, because there is no right ventricle in a patient with tricuspid atresia. And of course, then you will have a murmur of VSD or pulmonary stenosis in a classical tricuspid atresia. But in an uncomplicated tricuspid atresia, LV is no, apex is LV, but in the normal position. Hyperdynamic LV, which is displaced, like in this particular patient, will indicate either LV dysfunction or mitral regurgitation.
Yeah, 80% of the cases of tricuspid atresia will have the murmurs, and it could be because of the either because of the VSD murmur, and sometimes it could be the even pulmonary stenosis murmur. The classical description of the holosystolic versus crescendo decrescendo really doesn't say that is the VSD versus the RVOT obstruction murmur. And another extra murmur which can be expected in this case is because of the Glenn, we may have a continuous, but usually the other palliative surgeries like a BT shunt and everything will have the continuous murmurs. This is almost like a venous hum. Sometimes we can hear a continuous murmur of a venous hum variety, but that is very, very rare because most of the time the SVC flows are very low velocity flows.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. I think the only thing that you can make out by listening to this loud murmur is that if it is a murmur of PSD or pulmonary stenosis, then obviously at the time of Glenn, her MPA, main pulmonary artery, is not ligated, because in a classical Glenn where main pulmonary artery has been ligated, there are no murmurs. There is no systolic murmur in those cases. You just hear normal first heart sound, single second heart sound, and that's it. No murmur. Here, because you're hearing a loud murmur, you can almost infer that this patient has some antegrade flow into the pulmonary artery. That means his pulmonary stenosis, her pulmonary stenosis is still there. It has not become atresia. That means the pulmonary artery has not been ligated, which is the usual practice with Glenn. But yes, very often we leave antegrade flow in these patients. It depends a lot from surgeon to surgeon. Unless this murmur is because of mitral regurgitation. That's another cause of systolic murmur at 16 years of age in a patient with single ventricle AV valve regurgitation.
And one more thing is about the rhythm. Most of the time, the patients may have the rhythm disturbances in the tricuspid atresia and subsequent age groups, like a 16 years or something. So then, if it is not a normal sinus rhythm, that can also be reflected by the absence of an AV, which is another positive finding we got to say that it is still the child is in the sinus rhythm. That is the first thing, other than the regularity of the pulse rate and everything. And say another component is the about the second intercostal space pulsations. Usually the single second sound is present is because of the when the PS is there significant enough, but sometimes the DTJ, when the posteriorly situated pulmonary artery with or without PS, we can have the single second sound. And if it is an LTGA, which is the least common variety associated with tricuspid atresia, then you may have a second and a third intercostal space pulsations, which will represent a L-malposed aorta.
Do you attribute this murmur to an RVOT murmur, but it's in holosystolic 4/6, less chances of it being an RVOT murmur? It looks like it could be more of a
more likely to be VSD murmur. And I think we know in tricuspid atresia, often the obstruction is at the VSD level. So this is pretty typical of tricuspid atresia, where you have most often the obstruction occurs at the VSD level, and that the reason for patients to become more and more blue is because the VSD becomes smaller and smaller with time. So it's possible that at 1 week of age, she didn't have much cyanosis because the VSD was not so bad, not so small. But then over a period of time, as her VSD got smaller, she became more and more blue. That's quite a usual story in tricuspid atresia, because the obstruction level is at VSD level in majority of these cases. There may be an additional infundibular obstruction, but the major obstruction is usually at the VSD level.
So at the end of clinical examination and history can be boiled down to 2-3 diagnoses. One is tricuspid atresia, type 1, that is with a restrictive VSD and PS. Single ventricle, that is a double inlet LV with VSD PS. And as you said, the DORV with restrictive VSD. Epstein's, we are enlightened in the diagnosis because the history and the examination does not fit into the Epstein.
Yes, absolutely, because LV cannot be hyperdynamic in an Epstein's anomaly.
even in the history, even if they have a neonatal cyanosis, abstinence to cyanosis actually improves over a time when the PVR reduces. They might have a second stage of cyanosis, but the history doesn't fit into abstinence.
Agreed. I think one more condition that we should consider is with an LV apex is an unbalanced atrioventricular septal defect, because atrioventricular septal defect can have an unbalanced variety where the larger ventricle is LV and the smaller ventricle is RV, and this behaves almost like that with tricuspid atresia. Also, such patients are not suitable for two ventricle repair, so they also underwent a Glenn. So in functionality, it behaves like univentricular heart or a single ventricle, but there are actually two ventricles, one ventricle being very small. And these patients often have AV valve regurgitation because of the abnormal atrioventricular valve. And therefore, if you get regurgitation murmurs in patients who are blue, you have to think of AVST or atrioventricular septal defect with pulmonary stenosis.
Shall we go to the ECG? Next slide, please. So this is the ECG of the patient, normal sinus rhythm with a heart rate of around 50 per minute, counterclockwise loop, left axis deviation, normal progression of R waves. P wave appears normal, PR interval is normal, no ventricular prominence is seen specifically.
Yes, I think it's pretty classical of tricuspid atresia. In fact, majority of the patients with tricuspid atresia, when you're seeing in the outpatient department and you're finding a patient looks like the tetralogy and the ECG shows left axis deviation with no right ventricular forces, I think you're almost going to be correct if you make a diagnosis of tricuspid atresia in every case. So left axis deviation with absence of right ventricular hypertrophy is pretty classical for tricuspid atresia. Having said that, you can get a similar kind of an ECG, sometimes in single ventricle and sometimes in atrioventricular septal defect, which are unbalanced, which are where the left ventricle is bigger than the right ventricle. So these are some of the differential diagnoses, but I think classical ECG of tricuspid atresia is this.
Are there any other points which differentiate it, as you said, from single ventricle?
Yes, I think in single ventricle, you can have all kinds of excess and all kinds of complexes in the precordial complexes. So here you have left axis deviation, which you can get sometimes in single ventricle also, but the complexes on the precordial leads, which suggest only left ventricular complexes and no right ventricular complexes, is quite typical of tricuspid atresia. Having said that, you can expect any type of ECG in single ventricle, so you cannot rule it out. But I would say 9 out of the 10 or 9.9 times out of 10, you're going to be right if you say tricuspid atresia.
Yeah, the right atrial enlargement in tricuspid atresia?
So right atrial enlargement in tricuspid atresia is quite dependent on the size of AST. If you have an AST which is non-restrictive and large, then right atrium may not enlarge. And because it almost behaves like a single atrium, right and left behave like a common atrium, and therefore you may not get any feature of right atrial enlargement. If you get right atrial enlargement in a tricuspid atresia, think about a restrictive AST.
But only one finding which I'm thinking a little bit odd is the left ventricular hypertrophy. I expect to this age of the 16 years, much more prominent left ventricular forces. Of course, it is looking like a normal progression of the left ventricle than a prominent left ventricular forces. By this age, we expect the single ventricular to be significantly volume overloaded for the longer time, and we expect the much more the prominent left ventricular forces.
I would say if we go to V7, V8, because our apex is shifted out, we might get better LV forces.
That's true. And a few more important features. Sometimes we may see the first degree AV block occurs in 15% of the cases of the with tricuspid atresia also. And even short PR interval is also occur. But without any pre-excitation also it is known to have. I don't know what is the reason for the short PR at the condition without a pre-excitation. You have any explanation, madam?
No, I don't. I don't have any explanation. But you are right that pre-excitation is most unusual in tricuspid atresia, and they can have a PR which is long or short.
Yeah, and mainly this leftward shift in the superior axis of the QRS is because of the early origin of the left bundle, which causes the this leftward shift.
Yes.
And as already madam mentioned, it is a classical is a clockwise loop, and it is occurs in 95% of the cases when the normal related great arteries are there. Very occasionally when there is a transfusion of the great arteries, we may not have the
Yes.
counterclockwise loop.
Agreed. Yeah. If there is a transposition, then your ECG gets disturbed for sure. Yeah.
Can we have a normal axis in these patients or a right axis?
I think normal axis, if you have transposition, you can expect a normal axis sometimes, because very often in transposition, the VSDs are large and RV is not so badly developed. I mean, it's small, there is tricuspid atresia, but the RV mass is not very small because of the large VSD that these patients have. So those who have transposition very often have pulmonary arterial hypertension. That means they have large pulmonary blood flow and not pulmonary stenosis. You may get some good, some axis which is more towards normal, not right, but more towards normal. Right axis deviation would be very odd for tricuspid atresia.
Here there is no atrial enlargement. Does that mean that we don't have a prominent ASD or anything? Because if it's a prominent ASD, both right atrial as well as left atrial enlargement should be seen.
No, if you have a large ASD, you may not get any atrial enlargement because the two atria are behaving like single atrium. If you have restrictive ASD, then you will have features of RA enlargement.
RA enlargement. Yeah. But biatrial enlargement is not seen?
No, usually. And it is not much, atrial enlargement is not much in these patients unless, of course, the pressures are rising, which is like a failing fontan. Then you may get it.
No, but someone mentioned as a loop is a clockwise. But you're saying it is a clockwise?
No, with an absence of QVs in the inferior leads and the Q in L1 AVL, it is a counterclockwise loop.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. But someone is mentioned about it. Just I wanted to clarify to them that it is not a clockwise. Yeah.
I messaged him privately and told him that.
Okay. Good. Please go ahead.
Okay. And what about the LV forces, madam? When we said that the apex is LV apex and hyperdynamic, is it that we don't see ECG findings of an LV prominence or anything in tricuspid atresia?
I think left ventricle forces may be prominent. I would say at 16 years, I would expect it to be prominent. But I think, as I was telling earlier also, if you take V7, V8, because her apex is shifted out, it is beyond the mid-clavicular line, you might see better LV forces. But I think more important for tricuspid atresia is not LVH, more important is absence of RV forces. That is what makes it tricuspid atresia and not LVS necessarily.
Now, tricuspid atresia has 2-3 varieties, that is the type 1, type 2 and type 3. So right. With this ECG, with the left axis, the left and superior axis, can we commit as a type 1 type of tricuspid atresia?
Yeah, I think here we are going to say no transposition because the axis is perfectly left, the forces are all left, there is no right ventricle. So I'm going to commit to type 1, and because there is pulmonary stenosis, I will commit to type 1B, which is the commonest. I think as a general rule, when you have reduced pulmonary blood flow, most of the time you will have normally related great arteries. When you have large pulmonary blood flow, most of the time you would have malpose or transposed great artery. That means 2B and 1C. Sorry, 1B and 2C are the common varieties.
So the most common is tricuspid atresia with normally related, almost approximately 75 to 80% and have this.
Yes.
And less common is the tricuspid atresia with TGA.
TGA with no PS. With no PS. Okay. With no PS. Yeah.
Okay. Which is responsible for less, I mean, maybe around 15 to 20% patients, we might see that.
It also depends at what age are you seeing them, because those are the patients who do not go to this age. Because those are the patients who had severe pulmonary arterial hypertension. They are in failure. They behave like large pulmonary blood flow situations. So they don't reach this age unless you do something to them. But tricuspid atresia with reduced pulmonary blood flow, the typical 1B variety, tends to have a better survival in the long run.
Can we go to the X-ray?
Yeah.
Next slide, please. Chest X-ray PA view, situs solitus, normal penetration, appears centrally placed, and there seems to be no cardiomegaly. Apex is LV apex. Mild RA enlargement, not classically fitting into it. The mediastinum appears normal, the pedicle appears normal. The concavity in the pulmonary artery. If you see the pulmonary congestion, pulmonary vascular markings are not seen beyond the 1/3. So basically, we can say a pulmonary oligemia.
Yes, I agree. I think this X-ray is really not classical of tricuspid atresia. I'm not very convinced of the LV apex. because the apex is actually dipping back, or let's say
Dipping
dipping
down.
yeah. So I would say this is
At
very
the same time, it is not classically the lifting.
Yes.
I mean, it's not fitting into either of
Yes,
them.
yes.
Yeah.
So I would probably not say that this is classical tricuspid atresia. I think what we can say is that it is fitting with cyanotic heart disease with reduced pulmonary blood flow, because you have absence of
Pulmonary
cardiomegaly, you have pulmonary oligemia, you have an aorta which is little prominent. If you see the knuckle on the left side, left cardiac bottom, it's a little prominent. Therefore, aorta is a little prominent. Vascularity is definitely reduced, no doubt about it. But the classical X-ray of tricuspid atresia you should not see right atrium. I mean, you can see right atrium, but usually if there's juxtaposition of RA appendage, then you don't see the right atrial border. It is behind the sternum, because the right ventricle is so small that the RA or the right atrium tends to shift behind the sternum. So it's called RA cutoff sign. Sometimes that means there is an RA, but you don't see it because it is gone behind the sternum, and that's very classically seen with juxtaposed RA appendage, juxtaposed appendages. So this,
Yes,
I would say,
of the right
fits
heart
in
border.
of the right heart. So it fits in with your diagnosis, but if you just give me the X-ray, I can't diagnose that tricuspid atresia.
And
We
one
can
more
say
thing
it is a decreased pulmonary blood flow situation.
Yes. And
yeah, it
absence
is
of cardiomegaly.
it's supposed to gland, so we're supposed to see the prominent SVC, but that is
Yeah.
also not very prominent actually.
I
Only
think
this.
it will depend on the pressure in the superior vena cava. If the pressures are not very high, then you may not see prominent SVC.
But clinically, there is increased elevated JVP and a prominent A wave.
Yes.
So that is.
I would be a little surprised if the JVP is elevated in somebody who doesn't have puffiness of the face, because the first thing that happens in Glenn is facial puffiness. Because once the SVC pressure rises, then the face starts getting puffy. So maybe JVP is very little elevated, not much elevated.
And one more thing
I
is
didn't know how much of it is elevated.
Yeah. And one more thing is normally related great arteries is more likely because the mediastinum is the normal size, and it is not a narrowed as in the TTGA, or aorta, either ascending aorta is not the L-mal post. So it is more likely normal related great arteries.
Can we go ahead for the echo?
Yeah.
Situs solitus levocardia, normally related great vessels. RV is small and rudimentary, a dilated RA, AVVA concordant, left aortic arch with good size confluent pulmonary artery, normal pulmonary venous drainage. Tricuspid atresia with large OS ASD of size 2.8, a restricted perimembranous VSD of gradient 42, moderate infundibular pulmonary stenosis of gradient 50, no PDA coarctation, aortic valve is normal, good biventricular function, and a patent PDG bidirectional glent with laminar flow. How do we proceed, I mean, for the echo in these patients, and what do you suggest, what do you want to look for in the echo in these patients?
So I think, first of all, of course, establish the diagnosis of tricuspid atresia by doing a 4-chamber view where you see the tricuspid valve is atretic. There is a membrane kind of a thing from RA to RV. You don't see any communication between RA and RV. Then once you, of course, you start with situs solitus and all that. I forgot to tell you, expecting that situs and all is looked at, like in any other congenital case. But if you're looking for a patient of tricuspid atresia, you're going to see the diagnosis immediately in front of you as soon as you do a 4-chamber view, because the tricuspid valve will be absent as well as the right ventricle will be small. Now, the size of right ventricle depends a lot on the size of VSD. If you have a large VSD, RV tends to develop better. But if you have a small VSD, then RV tends to be small. Because remember, the only flow RV is getting is through the VSD. So the size of RV depends on the size of VSD. So in most of the cases with who have pulmonary stenosis, you expect VSD to be small and therefore RV to be correspondingly quite small. It may have just an inlet portion below the tricuspid valve, and then it gives origin to the pulmonary arteries. But obviously, all the flow into right ventricle and pulmonary arteries coming from the left ventricle, unless patient has had surgery like a Glenn, like this patient has had. RA is dilated, but usually if the ASD is non-restrictive, like you have a 28 millimeter over here, you don't expect RA to be bigger than LA, because RA and LA are almost behaving like a common chamber. All the blood that is coming into RA is getting transferred into LA through the large ASD. So the very, very important point is to look at the size of ASD in a patient of tricuspid atresia, because that is where the whole cardiac output is going to come from. So having a large size is very, very important. Of course, if somebody is grown to this age of 16, it is likely that she had a large ASD or she underwent a nasal septectomy at the time of Glenn. Very often, if you have a restrictive ASD, then the surgeon will enlarge it at the time of surgery. But if you're seeing a patient whose native tricuspid atresia has not undergone any surgery, please look at the size of ASD very carefully. See if there is any gradient across the VSD, because if it is restrictive, then you will have a gradient from right atrium. Here, of course, the size is large, so we don't look the atrioventricular concordance. Obviously, the tricuspid valve is not there, so it's very difficult to say which valve is which, because you have to have both the valves to say which is mitral, which is tricuspid. But considering that the tricuspid, the atretic valve is tricuspid valve, then the other one has to be mitral, which is connected to the left ventricle. So usually there should be AV concordance, unless we are dealing with a malposition kind of an anatomy, which is very unusual. Then you look at the VA relationship, ventricular-artery relationship. Aorta should come out of LV and PA should come out of RV. And the relationship between the two arteries should be such that aorta is posterior and pulmonary artery is interior and to the left. So then after you've seen the anatomy, then you look for pulmonary stenosis, you look for VSD. Usually, as I said, VSD tends to be small. It could be muscular VSD, it could be outlet foramen, as we call it sometimes. That means a higher VSD, where you're going to get a gradient of pulmonary stenosis, unless the surgeon has already ligated the main pulmonary artery at the time of Glenn. But if not, then you're going to get gradient at the ventricular level. Look for an additional gradient at the infundibular level, which you may get sometimes, but not necessarily. And then look for the pulmonary artery size, look for the confluence of the pulmonary arteries. Is there any stenosis of the origin of left or right pulmonary artery? Then look for the aortic arch, whether it is right or left arch. Tricuspid atresia is one disease where you mostly have a left aortic arch. And then, of course, if patient has undergone a Glenn, then you look for the Glenn flow. You have to put your transducer over the superior vena cava on the right side and look for the flow from the superior vena cava into the pulmonary artery. I one clip for Glenn, post-Glenn also, which we can see later. But that is very, very important, that you see the superior vena cava pulmonary artery. So having said that, in some older patients, like 16 years old, you may not be able to see very good view of Glenn observation, patency of the shunt. But sometimes in relatively thinner individuals, you are usually able to see if you do a suprasternal view or extend the neck of the patient and put it on the transducer on the right side, then you should be able to see the flow. When you are seeing the flow, you will be able to see that it is a passive venous flow and not a pulsatile flow like that in the pulmonary artery. Occasionally, you may see reversal of flow in the Glenn circuit. So if the pulmonary artery pressures are getting higher, or if there is an antegrade flow which is making it pulsatile, then you may have reversal of flow in some phases of cardiac cycle back into the superior vena cava. So ideally, it should be all blue, but sometimes you can get a little bit of red also, suggesting that there is a reversal of flow in a Glenn, which is not normal, but yes, it is occasionally seen.
How can we say on echo that the BDG is not patent?
I think you will not be seeing the flow from the superior vena cava into the right pulmonary artery. So that will tell you that BDG is not patent. But sometimes it is restricted, not totally blocked. Then you're going to get a gradient across the superior vena to right pulmonary artery. You will start getting a gradient or a turbulence in that.
Yeah, but this is as we already know that is low flow situations. So really our Nyquist limit should be quite low as a 30 to really to pick it up. And most of these even stenosis, the gradients is going to be the 0.8 meters per second or something. So really to pick it up, thus we should have a low color settings to pick it up.
I think the best way to pick it up is to see that the signals are continuous. So it is not the amount of gradient that helps you. This is true for all venous circuits because the pressures are low. Whether you're looking for TAPVC obstruction or any obstruction, it is the continuous nature of that signal. That means the signal never touches baseline in any phase of the cardiac cycle. That tells you that there is an obstruction. The gradient may be 4 or 5 or 6. That means the velocity may not be more than 1, but it is the continuous nature of that signal which tells you that there is an obstruction on the venous side.
Few of the signs to suspect when you are directly not able to see that whether it is an obstruction is present or not is a dilatation of the IVC is one thing, and the phasic variation, it doesn't touch never to the normal. That is the most important one. And the flow reversal and the A wave sometimes, which is much more frequently that can be seen in the Fontan. then this flow reversal is not a normal phenomena. If it is a present, it is also subject says that there is some obstruction. And of course, transpulmonary gradient calculation. So that is also gives almost the same thing. What you are calculating is a transpulmonary gradient. That also says that the patient has an obstruction. And about an ASD, most of the time, as Madam mentioned, the size is the most important one. But the location of the ASDs, which is most frequently the ostium secundum, but it could be the ostium primum ASDs, are also known to be the tricuspid atresia. And the VSDs, as already mentioned, Madam, is the muscular, and it could be the outlet or doubly committed also very occasionally. This is the VSD location is very important, whether it is produced as subpulmonic or subaortic obstructions, the transposed great arteries. The same, the subpulmonic obstruction in the case of related and becomes a subaortic. And of course, the Glenn flows are very, very important. The classical demonstration of the three phases, even though it is a continuous, but still we can demonstrate this variation depending upon the ventricular function and the intrathoracic pressure changes. So the classical demonstration, even though it's a continuous variation of the atrial contribution, especially in the Fontans, not in the Glenn. Glenn usually we separate it out from the SVC to the RA, but in the Fontan, again the inferior vena cava is communicated to the SVC to the RPA. So we have the reflection of these changes of the right atrial and the left ventricular pressure changes will be reflected. So we can have the phasic variation. That may be the reason why continuous flow.
So in a Fontan circuit, the inferior vena cava is also connected to the pulmonary artery, to the right pulmonary artery most of the time. So the whole venous blood, excepting the blood from the coronary sinus, is now actually reaching the pulmonary artery completely. There is no ventricle interposed. So the whole circulation runs by one ventricle contraction, which is the left ventricle here, which is, so it ultimately is the left ventricle which provides the entire circuit or the flow to that circuit, and that is how the Fontan circuit works. And that is why you have a pressure in the Fontan circulation or a Fontan circuit is same as that in the superior vena cava, is same as in right pulmonary artery. And I mean that those are responsible for so many complications of Fontan, which we can maybe discuss later. But Fontan circuit is a passive circuit with no active contraction. It's all like a large vein. It's like a large vein.
But negative intrathoracic pressures usually contributes to
a lot
for the 35% of the contribution of the flows into the pulmonary arteries.
So having healthy lungs is very, very important for a Fontan patient.
This patient, one is echo is for the diagnosis. Second thing is to see for associated anomalies. Commonly, maybe coarctation and interrupted aortic arch are commonly associated with this. And then to evaluate this patient.
Coarctation and interruption are usually not associated with 1B. They are often associated with the type 2. So if you have somebody having pulmonary stenosis, that means type 1B or type 2B, then the likelihood of interruption or left-sided anomalies is extremely low. It is so low that you hardly see them at this stage. Whichever patient has almost succumbed.
When it is transposition, you need to see for these aortic arch abnormalities and coarctation.
Yeah, normally related great arteries usually associated anomalies as low as 20%, but whereas in the transposition it is as high as 68 to 70%. And another associated common anomaly in this we have to see, especially in the NECO, is persistence of LSVC. It has two implications. It has a 16 to 18%. Surgically is important. Second one is surgeon can make use of the presence of the left SVC for the by the both sides gland doing it. So that oxygen saturation will be much better improved.
In fact, if there is a left SVC also, the surgeon has to do a bilateral bidirectional plan. He cannot leave the left SVC alone. Left SVC and right SVC both have to be communicated to the corresponding branch pulmonary arteries, and it is called bilateral bidirectional plan.
Shall we see some echo views, madam? Next view, please.
Yes.
Next slide. Anita
ma'am. Actually, this is a still frame. We have two views. This is for the adult cardiologist who usually like to keep 4-chamber view like this. So you can see that there is a left ventricle which is large, the right ventricle looks quite small. You don't see the left AV valve very well, but there seems to be a valve here, whereas on the right side it's like a ledge of tissue. You don't see anything on the right atrium to left atrium. Next, please.
In the autopsy, they demonstrated that the complete absence of dimple on the right ventricle and sometimes membranous. Can you get out that and then echo-wise?
I think it depends on the kind of RV, that size that you have. So I think the autopsy of, so there is a turbulence across the VSD, as you can see. This is the left ventricle, this is the right ventricle. So the majority of the pulmonary stenosis that is happening is because of the restriction. It's not too bad over here, as you can see, but if there is, as you can see, the gradient is about 40 or something. Yeah, it's less than 60. So it is likely that there would be another gradient at the infundibulum level. So this gradient is equivalent to PS gradient that you see in tetralogy of Fallot. And in a patient who has a single ventricle like tricuspid atresia, PS gradients are very, very important, because you must remember that the PA pressure depends on this gradient. If the gradients are not very high, then the PA pressure may be little on the higher side, and such patients are not suitable for a univentricular repair or for a Glenn surgery. So unlike tetralogies or double conditions where you can do two ventricle repair like DORV and all, here in a single ventricle physiology, whether it is tricuspid atresia or any other thing, pulmonary artery pressures are of critical importance. When you read the 10 commandments of Fontaine circulation, or 10 commandments to see the suitability for Fontaine, PA pressure is one of them, PVRI is another. So we have to be very sure that we are not dealing with any increase in pulmonary artery pressure, even if it is increased to, let us say, 22, 23 mean. That could be very detrimental if you send this patient for surgery. So this is just a still frame of that. Yeah, so this is the Glenn I was talking about. So this is almost a suprasternal view. This is the left innominate vein. This is superior vena cava, and this is the right pulmonary artery. So you can see that there is a good blue flow across the Glenn, and there is no obstruction that is seen over here. But many a times you may not get very good flow, but one can try. And in a relatively younger individuals, you can get it.
No, there is some red flow in the lower end of the SVC. Do you give any importance to this?
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry, because it looks very low velocity. As you can see, there's no turbulence at all. You can see the Nyquist limits are so low, 23 only. So I wouldn't worry about it, because I see unobstructed flow getting into it. And usually if there's a reversal, then it will be more from pulmonary artery to SVC. So there may be slight amount of sort of, revolving blood, or blood which is within that cavity, which is going around and producing that kind of red shadow, because our limits are very low. Okay, so this is all I have for the echo.
In evaluation for Fontaine, on echo we can make out majority of the things.
Yes, but I think in tricuspid atresia is one condition where I would like to catheterize them, because as I said, to get pulmonary artery pressure and to get pulmonary vascular resistance is of paramount importance, and therefore I would like to cath each and every patient of tricuspid atresia, especially post Glenn, before sending them for a Fontaine procedure. Do
you want to go for any other imaging before you go for a cath?
Sometimes for Glenn, if we are going for Glenn, like before Glenn, then many a times we just do CT angio. If we are very sure clinically and by echo that PS is significant, that means patient is deeply cyanosed, the pulmonary oligoedema is very prominent on X-ray chest, pulmonary stenosis gradient on echo is 70, 80, then you're reasonably certain that this PA pressure is likely to be normal, and therefore this patient, I can just do a CT angio to demonstrate the size of pulmonary arteries and send this patient for a Glenn. But before I go for a Fontaine, I would catheterize each and every patient.
But can you make out the pulmonary artery distortions and the peripheral stenosis? All will be, the cath data will be sufficient, or you think you need additional imaging or anything?
I think I would do an angio to show pulmonary arteries. So once we are going in with the catheter, we might as well do all the angios, and so that you don't have to do any other imaging.
So ideally, cath is required for all cases of tricuspid atresia before going for a Fontaine.
Yes, I think post-Glenn, pre-Fontaine, cath must be done, because PA pressures are very, very important. Many of these patients, you may not even find them suitable for a Fontaine. Especially this girl who was operated at 3 years of age and she's now coming at 16. I would like to know what her LV-ETP is. Is her LV function good or not? What is her PA pressure? And it's possible that she may not behave very well following Fontan surgery, because Fontan surgery can, if not done properly, I wouldn't say not done, if you don't choose your patient properly, can be very bad. Patient just keeps on having pleural effusions, patient in the hospital for months together, and you don't know what to do with them. So sometimes a good Glenn is better than a bad Fontan.
So you require all the pressure data, you require the pulmonary angiogram, you require to see the pulmonary anatomy, you need to see the pulmonary vascular resistance, all on CAT.
And the ventricular function.
Ventricular function. So height of 140 centimeters with a weight of 47 kgs and a hemoglobin of 14.6, PCV of 58. The catheter course from the right femoral vein into the IVC to RA through the ASD into left atrium, from right femoral artery aorta to LV, and from the right internal jugular vein to SVC into RPA. Coming to the pressure data, FA pressure is 140 by 70 with a mean of 95, LV 110 by 4, LA and RA 2, PA pressures of 8 by 2 with a mean of 4, wedge pressure of 4, SVC 2 and RV was not entered. Will this pressure data suggest us something?
So I think the pressure data is reasonably good. I would be a little worried if she's dehydrated, because the pressure on the RA is really low. 2 is something that you expect not in normal people also. So I would think that she's a little dehydrated. That's why her pressures are so low. PA of 8, RA of 2. A little unusual, I would say. LVDP is also normal or low. I think I would like to say that she's anemic, because her hemoglobin is 14.5 at 16 years of age with a saturation of almost 80% only. So she's a bit anemic, but her pressures are reasonably good, and I think she should be a suitable candidate as far as pressures go for a Fontan circulation. The only thing I want to add is that many times in bigger children we are not using IJB, because for IJB sometimes it has associated problems like pneumothorax and all that. So we do it right antecubital vein in the arm, because in older patients, of course, if it's a 4-5-year-old child, you end up using IJB because their antecubital veins are not so good. But we are generally in older patients, we're going through IJB. Anybody who's, let's say, more than 15 kilos or 14 kilos, we're using IJB just for pressure, because you just need to put pressure, a catheter, which can be a 5 French catheter from the antecubital vein into the superior vena cava and into the pulmonary artery. And with the same catheter, you can put it in the superior vena cava and make angios for defining the pulmonary artery anatomy.
And do we need to take both MPA, RPA, all 3 pressures? Will it make a difference?
No, I think as long as you don't see any stenosis between the 2 pulmonary arteries, you expect one pulmonary artery pressure to be equal to the other one. And therefore, taking mostly it is the right pulmonary artery that the catheter tends to go. I'll be happy to take RPA if I show that there is no bifurcation stenosis.
Can you please comment on the PA pressures of 8 by 2?
Yes.
Is that systolic and the diastolic? Do we get the phasic demonstration in the pulmonary?
That's why I thought if we could see the real waveform, if we could see the hemodynamic waveform, that it will show. It is not like a systolic and diastolic pressure, but in this particular case, it may be because they have left antegrade flow. So sometimes when you leave antegrade flow, you may get a hybrid sort of a trace in pulmonary artery, little bit like that of PA and little bit like that of venous side. And I think that is what is happening here, because there's an antegrade flow, so you're getting a hybrid kind of a trace, which is between venous and all. But I think you have to actually look at the trace to comment whether it is ACV waves or it is systolic diastolic waves.
Coming to the saturation data, systemic FA sat of nearly 80%, IVC 61.8, RA 70.6, LA 75.8%, and PA 61.6%. So there is systemic desaturation, and the pressures are, almost not equal.
Yeah. I think the pressures in the RA and LA are equal, suggesting that there is a large AST, and your saturations in RA and LA are also not very different.
No.
So I think it fits in with a large, sizable AST.
Next slide, please. QP of 1.7.
We have Yeah, QP less than QS as expected because patient is blue. And in such cases, I think it is good idea to calculate QEP, Q effective flow. And that will give you the amount of right to left shunt that is happening. But this is expected. And what is the most important parameter that you have is PVR, which is normal. Or I think anything less than 2, 2.5 is quite good for a Fontaine's application.
What are the angios you suggest, madam, for this patient?
So the first angio I would do is into the pulmonary artery. When we have taken the pulmonary artery, please take all the pressures before you do any angios, because doing angios can actually elevate the pressures. So do all pressures, then do angio. The first angio can be into the superior vena cava, just above the anastomosis site. That means just above the RPA to SVC anastomosis. So if you inject there in an AP view with some cranial tilt, you should be able to see both pulmonary arteries very well. Please take a long angio, because sometimes there will be pulmonary AV malformations, which you will miss if you stop the angio before. So take a long angio till you see the levo phase filling the left atrium. And in that way, you will be able to pick up pulmonary AV fistula if they are there. The second angio could be a ventricular angio, which you can go either from the aorta into the left ventricle, or really you can go from the venous side also, right atrium, left ventricle. And that should be done in AP or a shallow RAO view. The idea is to look for the function of the left ventricle, to look for if there is any mitral regurgitation. And this angio will also show you a rudimentary right ventricle lying medial to the left ventricle. The third angio can be aortogram, which will show you any collaterals, because very often these patients who are relatively older can show you collaterals. And when you're doing an SVC angio, the first one that I talked about, I think you should also look for any veno-venous collaterals. That means any filling of azygous or hemiazygous vein, which can tell you that it is stealing blood. Because if they are really large and stealing blood, so sometimes you have to close them before patient undergoes Fontaine's surgery. But generally, with the pressure that you showed me of pulmonary artery of 4 mean or 5 mean, I don't expect much of veno-venous collateral, because they usually happen as a result of high venous pressure in the Glenn circuit.
Can we go to the next angio?
Yeah, most of the time is the PA anatomy is the most important one after the Glenn surgery. And as Madam always said, we have to take a longer view to see the levo phase. The another important thing is the presence or absence of anomalously draining pulmonary veins are also can be seen when you do such a prolonged one, which is also another additional important one. As already once Madam was discussing some other time, she mentioned about the confluent stenosis. So that is also, if stenosis more than 50%, then it is a very important information for us. In addition to the size and distortion of the PAs and veno-venous collaterals that can be the same. Some people will say that IVC angiogram addition is also may be useful, especially to rule out the interruption of the IVC and rule out the stenosis and a duplication of the IVC. Duplication of the IVC usually, unless we search for it, we don't see it. And it is important if you are going for a Fontan and a drainage pattern of the hepatic veins. So these information, some people add a additional IVC angiogram along with a ventriculogram.
This is an AP view showing the catheter position. The catheter coming from the femoral root is through the RA, through the LA, into the left-sided ventricle LV, and the superior catheter through the IJV, I think up to the pulmonary artery. Next slide, please. Yes. This is the LV angio. Can you run that?
So if you have a single plane LV angio, it is better, because we are not interested in looking at the VST, because we are not going to close this VST or to do a 2 ventricle repair. So that aspect has already been seen by echocardiography. So what you are interested in is actually the left ventricular function and any mitral regurgitation. And for that, an AP or a shallow RAO view is the best view.
Next, please.
Can we get information about a systemic outflow tract obstruction also in the ventriculogram?
I think I would rather depend on the gradient. So if you are having an LV to aorta gradient, that would, and in that case, you should do an LV angio and see if there's an LV obstruction. But if there is no gradient, which is usually the case, unless there's a transposition, I think that becomes again a problem in a transposition kind of a tricuspid atresia. In a normally related, that's usually not a problem. And therefore, just taking the gradient from LV to aorta is good enough to say that there is no gradient.
Can you run this?
So this angio is actually in right pulmonary artery, and as you can see that it's filling both the pulmonary arteries, right as well as left. They are confluent. The size of LPA, I think.
Yeah, I think
okay,
we cannot comment. I think there is another angio after this which is showing.
Okay. So this one also shows, but see, because of the view, the LPA is little end-on, because this is not an AP view. If you had done an AP view, you'll be seeing LPA very well. You have another angio?
Go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah.
Yes, very good. Yeah. See, this is almost an AP view. Sorry, show that.
Go back, yeah.
And here you can see that although the injection has happened in the right pulmonary artery, you can see both the pulmonary arteries filling very well. Yes, here you even have an MPS stem, and but what I'm worried about is there's nothing going into from the pulmonary artery into the ventricle. So I wonder if they've really ligated the pulmonary artery, or there's a very tight stenosis because there's no flow happening in the other direction. The branches are filling quite well. But the only thing is that you don't see the anastomosis part very well over here. So I would just do an angio higher than this so that I'm able to fill the SVC-PA junction. I'm able to visualize the SVC-PA junction on the angio.
At the proximal portion of the RPA, it is slightly aneurysmal compared to the LPA. But this may not be much implication.
Yeah, the RPA hasn't opened up very well, because this is a bit of an LAO. If you do complete AP view, then you'll be able to see that the initial portion of RPA is a little bigger than the after. So it's perhaps a mild stenosis somewhere on the way, which we have not shown because the RPA has not opened up very nicely here. But it doesn't seem significant, whatever it is.
Yeah, even periphery of the lungs are not demonstrated very well to see for AV
malformation. Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Can we go to the final slide? Next slide, please. So final diagnosis, a cyanotic congenital heart disease, tricuspid atresia type 1 with non-restrictive ASD and a restrictive membranous VSD with moderate subpulmonic stenosis, good sized confluent pulmonary artery, post Glenns with patention, normal sinus rhythm with no signs of congestive heart failure and infective endocarditis. So how can we discuss a bit about Fontan's and how to go ahead with the surgery?
Yeah, but I just wanted to say a few things in the diagnosis. Since we have catheterized this patient also, I think it's important to say normal PA pressure as a normal PVRI as part of the diagnosis, because that will really determine what kind of surgery are we advocating to this particular girl. Similarly, to say moderate subpulmonary stenosis is perhaps not right, because we know her PA pressures are normal and we know her LV pressure is very high. So there is a gradient of about 100 or 110. Has to be severe stenosis. Yes, it is possible that part of it is at PSD level and part of it is at a infundibular level. Third thing is that we should also talk about the ventricular function, AV valve regurgitation. Whenever we are talking of a patient who's post-Glenn, who's univentricular heart, and we want to think about doing Fontan circulation, I think all these parameters become very, very important, and you have the data. Of it, you know that left ventricular function is normal. You know LVDP pressures were 4, so normal LV function by echo also we know that there is no mitral regurgitation. So all that must come here, because now we are thinking of sending this girl for a Fontan operation, and all those parameters become very, very
the 10 commandments which was classically described, but all the 10 may not be required. Of them, at least 4 are required. That is, as Madam has said, pulmonary artery pressures, pulmonary vascular resistance, LV function, and absence of pulmonary artery distortion. All 4 of them are a must before the patient is suited for Fontan. Anything else we need to see before sending the patient for Fontan?
So the other thing I wanted to, I would think that her LPA is little on the borderline size. It doesn't look very big. So if you have any doubt, maybe it is okay. If you have any doubt, it is better to measure them. And you can measure them and either use Magoon ratio, or you can measure them and use it for Nakata index, which is basically pulmonary artery size, which is adjusted for body surface area. So those are very important issues in a Fontan circulation, because if you have pulmonary artery which are borderline, then again Fontan will be an issue, and Fontan failure might happen in the immediate post-op period. So I would measure right pulmonary artery, left pulmonary artery, add them and divide them by descending thoracic aorta. And for a tetralogy, we are quite happy if the Magoon ratio is 1.2 or more. But for a Fontan surgery, Magoon ratio should be more than 1.5. So we have to have good size pulmonary arteries, not just the pressure. So pressure, pulmonary artery size, pulmonary artery distortion, ventricular function, any AV valve regurgitation, these are, and of course, low PA pressure and low PVRI are very, very important features for a good, successful Fontan operation.
Yeah, for the students' sake, the 10 commandments and the choices criteria, what are the things which they can violate it, and now the other options are available?
I think age is one which you can violate. Sinus rhythm is another one which you can violate, because I think people have started to do the Fontan earlier and earlier. But I still believe if somebody is doing well following a Glenn, it's better to wait till 5-6 years before taking such patients for Fontan circulation, because they generally don't. I mean, they do pretty well till they're about 8-9 years of age. Only when the IVC contribution starts increasing, then their cyanosis becomes worse. So if patient is being followed up very strictly, ventricular function is normal, patient cyanosis not much, I don't mind waiting till 5-6 years of age and doing a Fontan. But now if you see literature, they talk about doing Fontan at 3 years of age or even 2 years of age. So that's something not many people agree to. Especially if you have left a little bit of antegrade flow, it's better to wait, because pulmonary fistulas will probably develop much less if you have antegrade flow. So that's number one. The other one was sinus rhythm. Yes, it is always better to have sinus rhythm, but with dual chamber pacing, you can actually make them into sinus rhythm by pacing them at atrial level as well as ventricular level. And obviously, this pacemaker has to be put in at the time of Fontan circulation, because you won't be able to reach those areas later. You can't do a transvenous pacemaker in them. So sinus rhythm is another one that you can violate. AV valve regurgitation, again, because we have facilities for doing a good AV valve repair, you can again, to some extent, not worry too much about AV valve regurgitation, of course, if it is very severe. But I think more important, the very, very important parameters that you should not violate are PA pressure, PVRI, PA anatomy. These three are probably the most important ones. Ventricular function comes next. To some extent, you can do Fontan surgery even with mild amount of ventricular dysfunction. But I think pulmonary artery pressure, pulmonary artery anatomy, and PVRL are very, very important parameters to go for a Fontan operation successfully. And if you are in doubt, please fenestrate the Fontan.
There was some question in the chat. Someone wanted to know regarding the prognosis of all the varieties of tricuspid atresia, which fares badly or anything like that. With your experience, you can tell that?
I think tricuspid atresia type 2, which is with transposition, does worse than type 1. Of the type 1, type 1B is the best. C and A are definitely worse than B.
Possibly they require an early palliative surgery before we send them to the second stage of BDG. It is 1A and 1C.
I think the trouble is that if you are dealing with 1C or 2C, palliation in such cases is a PA band, because you have to reduce the pulmonary artery pressure. And very often the PA band is either too tight or too loose. To get an ideal PA band where the pulmonary artery pressures are sort of normalized or normal enough to go Fontan later is very, very difficult. And that is the reason why those who have large flow do worse than those who have a natural pulmonary stenosis, which is present at the VSD and the infundibular level.
Josna madam, do we end it or any more?
Yeah.
Any more questions?
No. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, madam,
you.
for sparing your time.